Hi, I'm Kayla. My in-laws once pulled out a second chair at dinner, not for me, but for my husband's mistress. They called her daughter-in-law. And me? The ex. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but something inside me snapped, because while they were busy serving lies, I was preparing evidence. And the day I stepped out of that black limousine, with 2 bodyguards at my side, he panicked, she ran, and I rewrote every word they tried to write for me. Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been erased from your own story by the people who were supposed to protect you? Drop a comment below, I read everyone. I was folding laundry when the text came through. Family dinner, everyone's coming, no excuses. Just like that, no "Hi, Kayla," no explanation. Just those words, sharp as ever, from my mother-in-law's number. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, wondering if I should even bother replying. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on, like they'd clearly moved on from me. But another part, the part that still clung to some vague idea of decency or closure or maybe just curiosity, wouldn't let go so easily. So I went. The sky was already bruising into twilight by the time I pulled into the valet circle of the restaurant. My car, a modest silver sedan that had seen better years, looked like a paperclip between the Rolls and Bentleys lining the front. One of them had a vanity plate that read Zenlux, subtle as a punch to the teeth. I adjusted my scarf in the rearview mirror, simple pearl studs, light makeup, navy wrap dress I'd worn once to a cousin's engagement party. Polished, not flashy, safe. I took a breath, stepped out, handed over my keys, and walked in like I had a reason to be there. The hostess barely looked up. Name? Kayla Moore. I caught myself. Kayla. She scanned a list, nodded once, then turned sharply on her heel. Right this way. The dining room opened up like a theater. White linens, dripping chandeliers, laughter bouncing off the glass walls. And there they were, his family, already seated at a long, shining table that stretched nearly the length of the room. Most of the seats were full. Except one. It was tucked between the swinging kitchen doors and a drafty hallway, half shoved under the table, no placemat, no name card, just there. I stepped closer, and then I saw her. Zinnia. She was at the head of the table, wearing a deep emerald silk gown and, unmistakably, my mother-in-law's heirloom pendant, the green stone I'd helped pay to reset after her stroke. The same one she told me would be, for the woman who keeps our family strong. I stopped in my tracks. No one turned. No one stood to greet me. Not even Dorian. My ex-husband barely glanced up from his wine. Glad you could still make it, Kayla, his father called out. There's your seat, next to the bus door. He chuckled at his own joke. I walked over quietly, pulling the chair out myself. Its legs scraped loudly against the floor. No one flinched. A waiter passed behind me, nearly clipping my shoulder with a tray. I sat, spine straight, napkin untouched. Across the table, Dorian leaned toward a distant cousin. This is Zinnia, he said proudly, our future daughter-in-law. Future. Daughter-in-law. I swallowed hard. I must have missed the engagement. Then again, I seem to miss a lot these days, mainly because no one told me a damn thing. Wait, another voice piped up. An older aunt, I think. Aren't you Kayla, right? The ex-wife? Or are you just visiting tonight? I smiled politely. I'm here for dinner, just like you. A waiter approached. For the lady? He said, placing a menu in front of Zinnia, heavy, leather-bound, gold-stamped. Then he dropped a laminated children's menu in front of me, crayon included. Oh, he blinked. Oops, wrong one. Zinnia giggled behind her hand. Maybe she prefers simple choices. My cheeks burned. I handed the kid's menu back wordlessly. Then I noticed it. Her napkin was folded into a perfect swan, delicate, pristine, standing tall on her plate like some elegant guard. Mine, limp, unfolded, half off the table, like someone had dropped it there by accident. I reached to fix it. Zinnia leaned in, eyes glinting. "That's for real guests only," she murmured, then sipped her champagne. I didn't say a word. I took the crumpled napkin, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my bag. Let them laugh. I wasn't here to prove anything. Not tonight. The rest of the dinner blurred into a sequence of background noise. Clinking forks, fake compliments, Zinnia reciting a planned honeymoon as if she'd already moved into the wife role. I sat there, still, quiet, watching, not invisible, just observing. Let them forget I ever mattered. Let them think I was weak. They forgot who paid for Dorian's debt when his startup crashed. They forgot who cleaned up the legal mess when his mother defaulted on hospital bills. They forgot who stayed after every failed fertility appointment, when the truth they never spoke aloud was that he was the one who couldn't have kids. Not me. They rewrote me out of the picture. But I never dropped the pen. As dessert arrived, tiny white soufflés in gold-rimmed bowls, I finished my water, rose from my chair, and quietly placed an envelope on the table. It went untouched. No one even noticed as I walked out, but they would soon, because that envelope wasn't a dinner card. It wasn't for them. It was for the court. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky had already surrendered to dusk. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pale halos on the pavement. I sat in the car for a moment, engine off, hands resting on the wheel. My mother-in-law's laugh, sharp, hollow, still echoed in my ears, and Zinnia's whisper, "That's for real guests only." I carried the envelope in with the same care one would offer a newborn or a bomb. Setting it gently on the entry table, I slipped off my heels and unhooked my earrings like muscle memory. The house was quiet. No one called to ask if I got home safe. Not Dorian. Not even a courtesy text from anyone at that table. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, then poured myself a glass of water, though I didn't drink it. I just stared at the condensation forming and sliding down the sides, one slow drip at a time. Then I moved to the living room and sat. Nothing but the muffled sound of a neighbor's television seeping through the walls, some old sitcom rerun, accompanied by distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Life going on, without me. Across from where I sat, my own reflection stared back at me through the darkened window. Not angry, not broken, just still. I reached for the envelope again, this time with both hands. Inside wasn't just paperwork, it was everything. Years ago, before the cracks in our marriage became obvious, I had started keeping records. At first, it was just practical. When Dorian's first business tanked, I used my savings to pay off his debts. I even co-signed a second-chance loan so he could try again. I picked up extra shifts at the clinic. Then I took on a second job teaching CPR on weekends. Dorian said he needed time to find himself, and I, foolish, loving, blind, gave him that. When things finally started turning around and his app took off, he changed. Not overnight. It was subtle. He started traveling more. Networking, he'd call it. The late dinners. The smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when I asked how the meetings went. The way he stopped touching me, as if affection had a shelf life. The affair didn't start during hardship. It started when he felt powerful again, when he no longer needed the woman who picked him up from the ground. The documents in front of me held every wire transfer I'd made to his accounts. The deed to the house in my name. The small portfolio I'd built with my cousin's guidance. He had no clue about that. But the most important piece? A dated delivery receipt from the restaurant. A witness-stamped copy that proved I'd handed over financial disclosures in front of them all. Not that they noticed. I tucked that page aside and reached for a folder hidden beneath. From inside a taped flap, I pulled out something more delicate. An old ultrasound photo. 6 years ago, I had been pregnant. It was early. I'd taken the test on a whim after feeling strange for a few days. And when the clinic confirmed it, I didn't tell anyone. Not even Dorian. Because that same week, while clearing dishes after another dinner with his parents, I'd overheard him in the hallway telling a friend, "Kids just tie you down. I want experiences, not diapers. Kayla and I are focused on lifestyle." He laughed. The kind of laugh that told me it wasn't just words, it was a belief. I miscarried quietly 2 weeks later. I remember sitting in the shower afterward, letting the hot water scald my thighs, pretending it could erase the ache inside. No one ever knew, and I never gave them a reason to. Now, holding the faded image in my hand, I felt no tears, just a cool kind of finality. I walked to the kitchen, lit a match, and held the photo over the sink. It caught quickly, curling at the edges, turning to ash in the stainless steel. I stayed until the flame kissed my fingertips. Then I dropped it. That chapter was never mine to keep anyway. Back in the living room, I opened my phone and scrolled to a contact saved under the name A Trainer SK. My thumb hovered for a moment. Then I typed, "I'm ready for phase 2. No fanfare, no explanation, just a quiet declaration that I was done waiting for someone to hand me a better ending. On the table, beside the folders, I placed the white swan napkin. It looked oddly out of place in my tidy home, like a theater prop left behind after the show ended. I grabbed a sticky note and scribbled, "For real guests only, challenge accepted." Then I pressed it gently under the swan's wing. I had spent years thinking silence was grace, that being polite meant being patient, that giving space would make people see your worth. But sometimes, silence just teaches them how to ignore you better. My phone buzzed again. A new email alert popped up. Subject, Dorian V. Kayla, initial petition filed. He filed first. He thought that gave him control. I stared at the screen for a beat, then clicked it off. Let him believe that. He thought filing first would give him the upper hand. He didn't realize I had already reshuffled the entire board. By the time the email reached my inbox, I was already sitting in a quiet lobby on the 12th floor of a granite-clad building tucked between 2 corporate towers near the riverfront. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, casting streaks down the glass windows, and everything inside smelled faintly of leather, fresh carpet, and power. Not flashy, just intentional. A receptionist nodded to me with a warm but measured smile. "Ms. Jameson?" I stood. "Yes. Mr. Trainer will see you now." I followed her past a paneled hallway lined with black and white portraits of judges, civil rights leaders, and old court victories. The conference room wasn't huge, but every detail told a story. Clean wood trim, one single orchid in the corner, a framed photo of someone shaking hands with Thurgood Marshall. Arlen Trainer looked up from his seat at the far end, gray at the temples, wire-frame glasses, and a calm that didn't try to impress. He stood and offered a firm but unrushed handshake. "Kayla," he said, his voice like velvet over iron. "Have a seat. We've got some ground to cover." I sat. He slid a manila folder across the table. "Your husband filed at 7:41 this morning. He's citing emotional volatility as grounds to claim a higher share of assets." I let out a soft laugh. "Of course he is." Arlen didn't return the laugh, but there was a flicker in his eyes. "He made a mistake. He filed before you responded to the joint property reconciliation clause. That means technically you hadn't even rejected unity yet." I blinked. "So?" "So," he continued, "it undermines his entire position. He filed like a man in a hurry, which works in our favor." He pulled another file from his briefcase and slid it across. "This is your counterpetition, drafted with disclosures included. I added the supplemental note about the revocable trust. We'll get to that." My fingers brushed over the folder but didn't open it yet. He's always assumed I'd be 5 steps behind. Arlen tapped the table gently. "You're 5 ahead. Let's keep it that way." He reached into his file and retrieved a stack of documents labeled in clean type, "Revocable Trust, Kayla Jameson." The tabs were organized, the sections marked with dates, signatures, and stamps. "This," he said, "is the linchpin." 6 years ago, Dorian had nearly lost everything: credit cards maxed out, 2 failed apps, and a silent investor lawsuit that nearly went public. Back then, he begged me to take over the legal ownership of our remaining properties to protect the family. I'd created a revocable trust under my name, holding the deeds and accounts in a legal shell he assumed I'd forgotten. 2 weeks ago, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I reactivated it. He'd have to prove coercion to invalidate this, Arlen explained, and frankly, there's no evidence of that. You signed, he consented, the notary sealed. It's airtight. And if he tries to move anything? I asked. That's why we're filing a temporary restraining order with the counterpetition. He touches a cent. He risks contempt. I nodded slowly, letting the power of it settle. It wasn't revenge. It was return. Then I asked what had been circling my mind since last night. Will they try to drag her into this? Arlen leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Zinnia, only if they're foolish enough to list her as a financial dependent. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my handbag, pulled out a folded printout from the inside flap, a screenshot from Instagram. Zinnia, in some rooftop bar in Miami, holding her left hand just right for the camera. A massive oval-cut diamond ring sparkled against her perfectly manicured fingers. The caption, "Finally upgraded to what I deserve. You're worth it, love him." The timestamp was important. 4 weeks before Dorian filed. Still legally married, still sharing finances. $5,000 ring, I said flatly. She tagged the jeweler, the receipt's public. That's marital spending, Arlen confirmed. And if she tries to claim she's a dependent, that ring becomes evidence. A sharp ache rippled through my chest, not for the money, not even for the betrayal, but for how cheap my absence had become to them, as if the 10 years I spent building the roof over their heads meant nothing. And then I saw the comments below Zinnia's post. "You got rid of the baggage, girl." "Upgrade complete." I folded the paper slowly. "Not baggage," I said under my breath. "Blueprint." Arlen looked up. "Pardon?" I just smiled faintly. "Nothing." He pushed the pen toward me, the one I needed to use to sign the counterpetition. It was silver, sleek, and surprisingly familiar. Then I remembered. Zinnia had dropped this pen on the dinner table the night before, a monogram on the side, Z.E. She'd probably never even noticed it was missing. I took it in my hand, turned to the signature page, and wrote my name deliberately, line by line, the way I hadn't written it in months. Not rushed, not shaky, just certain. As I finished, I added one more note at the bottom, just below the legal text. Real guests sign in ink. The quiet between us lasted another few seconds before Arlen gathered the papers. "That'll do it. Expect a response within 48 hours. In the meantime, I suggest you stay where the noise can't reach you." "I already have." As I stepped out into the hallway, the drizzle outside had stopped. The clouds hung low and gray, but the wind had calmed. I crossed the lobby, thanked the receptionist, and pushed open the heavy glass door to the street. A black SUV pulled up to the curb just as I reached the sidewalk. The window eased down, smooth and slow. Zinnia, in a sleek trench coat, sunglasses even though the sun hadn't shone all morning, and that ring gleaming like it had something to prove. She leaned halfway out and tilted her head. "We need to talk," she said, like it was her idea. I smiled, because now I wasn't the one waiting to be invited in. I was the one holding the door. Zinnia didn't wait for my response. She leaned out farther, voice low but insistent. "Just 5 minutes, Kayla. I swear." I stepped closer, slowly. "Only if your driver doesn't shut that door." The man behind the wheel glanced at her in the mirror. She gave a reluctant nod. The door stayed wide open. I slid in and kept one foot angled toward the sidewalk. The interior smelled faintly of her perfume, sweet, powdery, expensive, but underneath it, something metallic clung to the air. Desperation. Zinnia tucked her hair behind her ear and crossed one leg over the other, too casually. "You don't strike me as someone who finishes things," she said, lips curved. "You flinch before the punchline." I didn't answer. Silence made her uncomfortable. It always had. And she hated when I didn't give her something to twist. She tried again. "You just sat there at dinner, like a stray we fed out of pity. No backbone. Just present." I tilted my head slightly, as if I were watching a tired actress struggle through a forgotten script. She pressed on, but her voice started to falter. "You know, Dorian told me you were unhinged, that you kept calling after he left, threatening to ruin everything." I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. The car filled with Dorian's voice, clear and sharp, from a voicemail time-stamped just 4 weeks ago. "If you don't sign the papers quietly, I'll make sure nobody ever sees you as stable again. I'll tell them about the breakdowns, Kayla. I'll make them believe it." The color drained from her face. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. She looked out the window for a second too long, pretending not to flinch. Then came her pivot. "He's got a past," she murmured, voice lowered now. "Things that won't look good in court. You know that, right?" I met her gaze. "They already have. Affidavits, background checks, filed, under seal." Her shoulders dropped a notch. Her bravado slipped like paint cracking beneath heat. She shifted her weight, fidgeting with the chain around her neck. That's when I noticed it. A delicate gold necklace, the clasp broken and held together with a tiny piece of clear tape. I let the silence settle again before speaking. "You're holding your life together with tape, Zinnia." She froze. I adjusted my sleeve just slightly, revealing my wristwatch. The inscription inside caught the sunlight. "Stand still, then strike." My father's gift. He'd worn it for years before passing it down. The last man who ever spoke to me like I mattered. Zinnia saw it but said nothing. Instead, she tried one last card. "You don't want this to turn ugly. He says he'll walk if you drop the claim on the trust. That's all he wants." Turned toward her fully now, voice low and even. "I'm not walking away. I built the sidewalk." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she wanted to say something clever, something final, but all she could do was sit there and breathe. That alone told me I had already won more than I expected. I stood to leave. The driver kept the engine idling. "Kayla," Zinnia called out as I stepped onto the pavement. I didn't turn back. Instead, I pulled out my phone again and hit the dial on Arlen's contact. "Arlen," I said when he picked up, "we may need to subpoena a few platforms. Instagram, possibly Venmo. I'll send screenshots." I crossed the plaza slowly, not because I was stalling, but because I had time now. No more rushing to fix things I didn't break. Halfway down the steps, my phone buzzed again. A text. From Dorian. "If you think this is over, you have no idea what I'm capable of." I read it once, then again, and smiled. I didn't flinch. The moment Dorian's text lit up my screen, I just stared at it like I'd seen it before, because in a way, I had. Not that exact message, but that tone, the kind that drips with false confidence, with a man clinging to power he never really owned. "If you think this is over, you have no idea what I'm capable of." I let it sit there a second longer, then typed back 3 words. "See you soon." And then I blocked his number, not in anger, not in fear, just silence, the kind that makes the other side uneasy. I set my phone down and exhaled through my nose. The late afternoon sun was filtering in through the blinds, throwing lines across the hardwood floor like bars. But I didn't feel trapped. Not anymore. I was exactly where I wanted to be. Right on schedule. After pouring myself a glass of water, I walked over to the side drawer I hadn't touched in months. I pulled out a slim leather folder labeled Winter Receipts. Inside it was a series of notes, dates, small lies, transactions I hadn't questioned at the time but logged anyway. I'd once mistaken them for petty, but now they were evidence. Every detail, every omission, every time his mask had slipped. I remembered the forged signature, how I'd discovered the joint certificate of deposit had been cashed out 6 weeks before I even knew we were separating. I'd asked him about it. He said, "Oh, I thought we agreed to use it for the tax payment." We hadn't. He just assumed I wouldn't notice. Then the business trip that was supposed to last 3 days. He said it was in Nashville. Turned out he'd rerouted to San Francisco. Alone, he claimed. Until a photo surfaced of him at a wine bar, laughing beside Zinnia, her red scarf unmistakable. And the holiday bonus, the one he told staff we had to forgo that year due to budget constraints. Meanwhile, I found a Venmo receipt later, to Zinnia, labeled, For your patience. More to come. More to come, huh? Each memory once felt like a cut. Now they felt like blades I was sharpening. The next morning, I dressed in gray slacks and a navy sweater. Clean, firm, nothing flashy, and drove myself downtown. The courthouse lot was nearly full, but I found a space tucked behind a delivery van. Walking inside, the marble floor beneath my boots clicked with purpose. At the records office, I requested the deed transfer forms for 2 properties listed in Dorian's divorce filings. I told the clerk I needed to verify the legal standing. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and retrieved a stack of documents. I took my seat at a side table, flipped through the pages, and there it was, on the bottom right corner of page 3. The name Zinnia Calhoun listed as the new co-owner of the Woodland property. Date stamped, 3 weeks before Dorian filed anything. Fraud, intent, premeditation. A quiet, brilliant storm forming on paper. As I took out my phone to start snapping photos, the clerk, older woman, maybe mid-60s, leaned slightly across the counter. She lowered her voice just enough. "Ma'am, if you're verifying that transfer, you might want to check line 5 on the notarized copy. That's all I'll say." I paused, looked at her. She gave the faintest smile, like someone who had seen this kind of deceit more than once in her career. I flipped back to the page. Line 5. Signature, Kayla D. Monroe. Except, it wasn't my handwriting. The tail on the K was off, and the spacing between the D and Monroe had that rigid mechanical slant. Someone had traced or copied my signature. Dorian. I swallowed, nodded my thanks to the clerk, and gently closed the folder. My hand didn't shake as I took out my phone and captured the pages. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I was in control. I walked out of that records room into the hallway and paused by the vending machine alcove. The moment hit me like an unexpected gust. My knees didn't give out, but they thought about it. My breathing went shallow, not out of panic, but because I knew. I was going to win. Aiming match, not in front of a jury of strangers, but in silence, on paper, in the very way Dorian had underestimated me from the start. I looked down and whispered to myself, "He's about to realize I was never the weak one." Then I looked at the visitor badge clipped to my purse. It read, "Guest." I pulled out a black pen from my coat pocket and scratched through it. Underneath, I wrote one word, "Owner." By the time I got back home, the streetlights had just flickered on. The house was quiet. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and pulled off my coat. Arlen was waiting on our scheduled secure video line. His tone was calm, but his eyes lit up when I showed him the forged deed. "This is gold," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We can file for immediate injunctive relief, freeze the assets, cite fraudulent conveyance." I nodded. "Let's get it done tonight." He paused. "Kayla, the next hearing will be public. The press might catch wind. You ready for your name being out there?" I didn't hesitate. "It was erased once. I'm writing it in ink this time." We ended the call after finalizing the motion draft. I emailed it off for notarization and leaned back in my chair, letting the soft creak of the wood carry a tiny victory. But it didn't last long. Just past midnight, I walked to the kitchen to fill a glass of water. That's when I saw it. An envelope, plain, unmarked, slid halfway under my front door. I bent down, picked it up, and opened it. Inside were printed screenshots of my therapy logs, private entries, reflections, painful ones. One line was circled in red ink. Sometimes I wonder if disappearing is the only piece left. I stood there, holding the pages, my heart neither racing nor still, just steady, present. They thought this would shake me. They forgot who wrote those words, and who survived them. The moment I closed the door, I didn't move. I stood there in the stillness of my apartment, clutching the envelope like it might burn through my skin. The floor beneath me felt solid, but my balance betrayed me, not out of fear, but because of what this meant. Whoever had sent this knew where to hurt. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, hands trembling not because I was afraid, but because this wasn't just a breach. It was a desecration, The therapy logs in front of me weren't files or screenshots. They were scans, precise replications of my own handwriting, or almost mine. I hadn't typed those words anywhere. No backups, no cloud. Just ink on paper, buried in a locked cedar chest at the lake house Dorian's mother owned. The same house Dorian used to visit during his so-called solo retreats. I stared at the circled sentence, red ink slicing through my memory like a scalpel. Sometimes I wonder if disappearing is the only piece left. Again. Again. That word wasn't mine. I'd written that entry 3 years ago. I remembered it too clearly. The smell of red wine and the sterile hotel ballroom. Dorian had laughed when I'd tried to speak during a fundraiser, cutting me off in front of his colleagues. She's just tired. She's been emotionally fragile lately. People chuckled politely. I stood there, cheeks burning, shrinking inside a dress I once loved. That night, I almost packed my things. Almost, but I didn't. I told myself to wait until the campaign closed, until the quarter ended, until I forgot that I deserved better. I shook my head now, not at the pain of the memory, but at the clarity I finally had. The logs were real, but this one had been altered. Subtly, but enough. I got up, crossed the room, and opened the drawer where I kept the scanned copies of every entry, an old habit from before I trusted myself to speak my truth out loud. Flipping to the same page, I confirmed what I already knew. My handwriting was the same, the content nearly identical. But again wasn't there. That one word changed everything. That one word turned grief into instability, doubt into a pattern. A soft ping sounded on my phone. Arlen's name lit up the screen. I answered. "Someone broke into the lake house," I said without preamble. A pause. What did they take? My therapy journal. A long exhale. And? They edited it. They forged a scan, added a single word I never wrote. "I need you to bring everything you have. The original scans, the envelope, everything." Already gathering it. That's federal. If they present that in court, it's not just contempt, it's criminal fraud. I nodded, even though he couldn't see. Let's make sure the judge sees it first. 2 hours later, I met Arlen at his office. The drive had been quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence, not to calm me, but to keep my mind sharp. Inside his conference room, we laid everything out like evidence in a trial that hadn't happened yet. Photos, scans, my original journal, the envelope. "We're filing 2 motions," he said, already typing. "First, a preemptive disclosure. We'll alert the court that there may be falsified mental health documents in circulation. Second, we're requesting a protective order to prevent Dorian or anyone linked to him from accessing or leaking personal materials." I leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Make sure it's airtight." He looked up. "He's scared, Kayla. This is desperation. He's throwing everything he has because he's running out of moves." I gave him a small smile. "Let him throw. I know how to catch now." Leaving the building, I didn't head straight to the car. Something pulled me toward the front steps of the courthouse, where people came and went like anxious shadows. And there, sitting alone on the bottom step, was a young woman. She clutched her phone, mascara streaking down her cheek. Her shoulders trembled with the quiet sobs of someone trying not to fall apart in public. Without thinking, I walked over and sat beside her. I didn't ask what had happened. I just offered a clean tissue from my bag. She took it with a whisper. "I'm afraid I'll lose everything." I looked at her, remembering how many times I'd said those words in my head. "Sometimes," I said gently, "losing everything is the first step to knowing what's truly yours." She stared at me for a long second, then nodded, just once. That moment stayed with me the whole ride home. Back in my apartment, I walked straight to the shelf where my journal lived. I pulled it out, sat at my desk, and opened to a fresh page. With steady hands, I wrote, "They tried to steal my pain, twist it into weakness. But I'm still here. I'm still writing. And this time, I hold the pen." As I capped the pen, a familiar chime sounded from my phone. A news alert. Real estate mogul Dorian Callahan faces fraud accusations amid high-profile divorce case. Below it, my name, full, clear, spelled right. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a spotlight. It felt like ownership. Dorian had spent years silencing me in every room we entered, whispering lies behind closed doors, making sure I felt like the unstable one, emotional, unfit, overreacting. But this was the beginning of his unraveling. I was about to take off my earrings and head to bed when the intercom buzzed. It was late. Too late for packages, too late for neighbors. Cautiously, I walked to the door. No voice came through the speaker, just a shuffle. Then the sound of something being slid underneath. An envelope. Again. I bent down slowly, picked it up, and opened it under the warm light of the hallway. Inside were printed screenshots of my own therapy pages, pages no one should have seen. But these weren't the same scans. These had comments written in bold black Sharpie, lines drawn, words circled. One stood out in thick red ink. Sometimes I wonder if disappearing is the only piece left. I stared at it, unblinking. A chill ran through me, not because I was afraid, but because this time I could feel how close we were to the endgame. My phone buzzed. It was Arlen. His voice came fast, urgent. "Kayla, they've just filed a motion to declare you mentally unfit to testify." I didn't say anything. He continued. "They moved up the hearing. It's set for 9 a.m. tomorrow." I exhaled, long and slow. Let them try. Because tomorrow I wasn't just going to testify. I was going to speak. And this time, I wasn't whispering. They moved the trial to silence me, but tomorrow I'll speak for the first time. And I won't whisper. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear. I had already walked through fear and made it out the other side. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the guest room at Arlen's place. My old apartment no longer felt secure. The image of that forged therapy journal kept floating behind my eyes like a ghost. By dawn, I was dressed, steady hands tucking my hair behind my ears, smoothing down my blazer. Arlen met me by the kitchen island, steaming mug in hand. "It's going to be crowded today," he said. "I hope so," I said. "Let them all come see." Outside the courthouse, I didn't take the witness side entrance like Arlen suggested. I walked up the main steps, slow, deliberate, not hiding, not anymore. 2 private security men walked with me, not muscleheads in suits, but quiet professionals. Their presence wasn't about fear. It was a message. I wasn't alone, not this time. As we passed through the courthouse atrium, whispers followed me like wind through dry leaves. "That's her. The wife. No, she's the one who caught him." I kept my eyes forward. Then I saw her. Zinnia, perched on the marble bench against the far wall. She looked down as I approached but didn't move, until I was nearly past her. "Kayla." Her voice was barely a breath. I stopped, stood and stepped closer, her face pale, lips pressed tight like she was chewing her own shame. "He didn't tell me about the offshore account," she said. I thought I was protecting the family." I didn't say anything. She shifted her weight. "You were never the fragile one." I was. I looked at her, really looked at her, and said nothing. Just let the silence do what words couldn't. Her eyes dropped, and without another word she walked away. I didn't feel victory, only confirmation. They knew what they'd done. The courtroom was already half filled by the time we entered. Journalists sat alongside court sketch artists, a row of family members I didn't recognize. His side. Mine didn't come. I didn't expect them to. Dorian was seated across the aisle, calm, slick, like a man who believed the mask was still holding. His lawyer stood, buttoned his jacket, and faced the judge. "Your Honor, we submit that Ms. Bray's psychological history, documented in these therapeutic records, renders her unfit to testify as a credible party in this proceeding." Arlen stood. His tone was steel and silk. Your Honor, we move to strike this baseless attempt to discredit a woman based on manipulated materials. We have expert confirmation that these documents were altered. We will also present a sworn affidavit from the therapist confirming both handwriting inconsistencies and breaches of storage. The judge glanced between the two sides. Proceed. I was called, not as a witness, but to answer the motion. I walked to the front, each step deliberate. The judge looked over her glasses. Ms. Bray, are you mentally fit to participate in these proceedings? I met her gaze. Yes, Your Honor, I am. There was a pause. But I won't just proceed. I will prevail. A murmur rippled across the room. The judge nodded. Do you wish to make a statement? I do. Arlen handed me the folded note I'd written the night before. I opened it slowly and began to read. Being wounded is not the same as being unstable. I was gaslit. I was humiliated. I was told over and over that my instincts were wrong, that I was overreacting. But I endured. I rebuilt myself with no help, no applause, no spotlight. That is not weakness. That is survival. I paused. And survival doesn't need permission to speak. I looked up. A young woman in the back row, early 20s maybe, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. She gave me a small nod. I nodded back. The judge thanked me and called a recess. As I stepped down, the bailiff announced, "All rise!" We exited the courtroom, and the moment the doors opened, the hallway burst with noise. Cameras, microphones, questions hurled like pebbles in a storm. Ms. Bray, did you fake your records? Is it true your husband hid money offshore? Are you seeking custody of the properties? I didn't answer. The black limousine waited just outside, the same one I'd arrived in during Chapter 1 of this twisted tale. But this time, I didn't feel like a pawn being transported. I felt like the player who finally took her seat at the board. Inside the car, Arlen sat beside me. We said nothing until the doors shut and the noise faded. Then his phone buzzed. He read silently, then turned to me with a small smile. The judge denied the motion. The court considers you fully competent. Full divorce proceedings are approved, and the fraud claims are now central to the case. I exhaled slowly, a quiet triumph. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply satisfying. As we drove, my phone lit up. Unknown number. Message. You think you've won? Tomorrow I bring the real proof. Let's see you rewrite that. Attached. A grainy photo of me sitting by my window 2 nights ago. Taken from the dark. I stared at the image. The hair on my arms stood up, but not from fear, from clarity. Someone thought watching me in the shadows would keep me small. But tomorrow, I'm stepping into the light. And I'm bringing everything with me. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my court clothes. The heels had come off hours ago, but my spine hadn't relaxed. Not even a bit. The light from my phone screen cut through the darkness like a blade. I opened the photo. It was me, sitting by the living room window, hair pulled into a loose bun, a legal pad in my lap. The timestamp read, 2:47 a.m. I remembered that moment. I'd been scribbling thoughts I couldn't say aloud, drafting answers to questions Dorian's attorney hadn't even asked yet, but someone had been there, watching, from outside. I got up, crossed the room, and pulled the blinds down in one sharp motion. The latch on the window clicked as I locked it. Then I dragged the chair away, replaced it with a steel bar I'd never thought I'd have to use. I stood for a long moment, not frozen, but calculating. Then I dialed. Arlen? Someone took a picture of me last night, sent it anonymously, through the window. We need to check the building footage. His voice was calm, but clipped. I'm already at the office. Give me 15. By the time I arrived at his place, he had the security feed pulled up. I watched the grainy footage with him, minute by minute, until he pointed. There. Someone had entered through the side entrance. They didn't linger. Walked straight down the hall. Confident. Access card, Arlen muttered, zooming in. Not forced entry. Whoever it was had clearance. I stared harder. What card? He clicked open the system log. Used at 1:36 a.m., registered to Dorian's company, assigned to Zinnia. The name sat there, cold and blunt. I stared at it. Then my phone vibrated. A text from Zinnia. I swear I wouldn't. You have to believe me. I didn't reply. Because I did believe her. She wouldn't have dared enter my place, not without him knowing. But maybe she didn't know just how deep she was entangled. Court reconvened the next morning. The hallway buzzed with reporters. Dorian arrived 20 minutes late, alone. No tie, no ring, and no Zinnia. He strode past me like we'd never been married. Inside, the session began with Dorian's lawyer standing confidently. Your Honor, we present new testimony to establish the respondent's ongoing instability, testimony from someone who knew her intimately, well before these events. A door opened. My stomach knotted. She walked in, brown curls cropped short now, wearing a charcoal blazer too big for her frame. Maureen, college roommate, the one who knew things about me from a decade ago, before therapy, before marriage, before the worst of it. She sat stiffly, looked straight ahead. I lived with Kayla during our undergrad years, she began. She frequently expressed feelings of not being real. She'd go days barely eating. There was one night she told me. My chest tightened. She said she didn't know if she wanted to exist anymore. The courtroom was silent. I didn't speak, not because I was ashamed, but because I was angry. I watched Maureen's hands shake as she stepped down. Betrayal has a sound. It's not loud. It's quiet, like pages turning too quickly, like a name spoken in past tense. During recess, Arlen slid a folded note toward me. I opened it. Just one line, scribbled. She took a $2,500 payment, LLC traced to Dorian's cousin. Want to use it? I looked at him. No words exchanged, just a nod. I stood, walked past Dorian, who had the gall to smirk, walked straight to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to enter a letter into the record. She adjusted her glasses. Proceed. Inside the envelope was everything. Maureen's payment trail, the company registration, the name of Dorian's cousin, even the transfer date, 1 week before she was summoned to court. The judge raised one brow, then glanced toward Dorian's lawyer. We'll reconvene in chambers, adjourned for the afternoon. When I got home that evening, I didn't turn the lights on right away. I set down my bag, took off my coat, then walked toward the window, the same one from the photo, but this time I opened the blinds. And then the window. The wind was sharp, cold, but I didn't flinch. I stood there, letting it sting my skin. Mug of tea in hand. Let them watch. Let them sit in their parked cars, behind glass, whispering. I wasn't hiding. Later that night, I reached for the journal, the one they tried to tamper with, smear me with, rewrite my story in. I flipped to the back. There was something tucked under the flap. I'd forgotten. It was a printed transcript. One of the early sessions I'd recorded without meaning to. It had picked up Dorian's voice from the next room, mocking, laughing. She thinks she's so composed, like she's got it all figured out. Let her. Wait till she sees what I do next. Click. The file ended, but my resolve didn't. I called Arlen again. Upload the memo. Submit it to the court database as formal evidence. He didn't hesitate. Already on it. I hung up just as the apartment intercom buzzed. I walked over, pressed the audio button. Hello? No answer. Only static. I stared at the blinking light. No voice, no face, just noise. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Let them hide. Let them scheme. Let them watch. Because I wasn't just stepping into the light tomorrow. I was the light, and every secret they buried was about to rise with me. He thought silence would shake me, but I didn't flinch, and now the silence was his to hold. I stood still for a moment after the intercom went quiet. No voice, just that eerie buzz fading into static. I didn't move right away. I just looked at my own reflection in the hallway mirror. My eyes were clear. My hands steady. That old fear, that flutter in my stomach I used to mistake for warning, was gone. Instead, I reached for the suit. The same black suit I wore to that dinner on the first night, back when I still thought I owed Dorian an explanation, when I still believed his betrayal had a beginning. But this time, this wasn't for him. This was my closing statement. My hair back, straightened the collar, and slipped the recording drive into my purse. Outside, the sun hadn't yet risen. The streets were soft with morning mist, and the city moved like it was still deciding whether to wake up or sleep in. Not me. I was wide awake. The courtroom was colder than usual, or maybe I just noticed it more now. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the scent of stale carpet mixed with someone's too strong cologne. Arlen leaned in and gave a brief nod. No words, just a slight movement of his hand. He was ready. The judge took her seat, and then it began. "Your Honor." Arlen's voice was calm, steady, almost surgical. "We'd like to submit new evidence, an audio recording recently uncovered, dated during the time frame of the initial divorce proceedings." The judge glanced over her glasses. "Is the defense aware?" Dorian's lawyer stood. "We were notified this morning. We reserve the right to contest." "You'll have your moment," she said, cutting him off. "Let's hear it." The clip began. Dorian's voice, his real voice, filled the room. "She thinks she's smart. I'll wreck her before she blinks. Let her think she's got the upper hand. It's more fun that way." The audio crackled, but his words landed sharp as glass. There was no mistaking the tone, no spinning it as a joke. Dorian shifted in his chair, trying to look unfazed, but the smirk he usually wore began to wither. His attorney whispered something frantically, motioning toward a notepad. The judge stayed quiet. For a long moment, she simply looked at Dorian, and then at me. "Thank you," she said. The ruling didn't take long. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Effective immediately, the marriages dissolved. All jointly owned real estate and assets, excluding contested family inheritances, are awarded to Ms. Bray. Mr. Bray will be subject to a formal inquiry for evidence tampering and potential perjury. She turned a page. Additionally, Ms. Zinnia Holloway's testimony is officially stricken from the record due to both conflict of interest and credible evidence of coercion. Dorian didn't stand. He didn't protest. He just sat there, swallowing nothing, hands clenched so tight the veins on his wrists bulged. I didn't look at him. He wasn't the story anymore. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with press, cameras clicking, voices calling my name, microphones extended from every direction. I kept walking, but one voice cut through the chaos. "Ms. Bray, any message for Mr. Bray or Ms. Holloway?" I turned for just a second. "They tried to write my ending," I said, "but I hold the pen." The limousine door closed with a soft click behind me. Back home, the apartment was quiet, not tense quiet, just peaceful. I poured a cup of chamomile, sat at my desk, and opened a new leather-bound notebook. The first page was crisp, blank, waiting. I wrote the words slowly, not out of hesitation, but intention. Chapter 1. The day I took my name back. I closed the cover and placed the journal beside the window, the same one I used to shut tight out of fear. This time, I left it open. The air was still cool, but it didn't bite. I stood there, sipping my tea, eyes on the city below. Somewhere down there, Dorian was probably scrambling for damage control. Zinnia, too. But that was no longer mine to carry. This was mine. A few days later, I took a walk through the park. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that makes you think things might turn out okay, even when you didn't plan for it. I passed a familiar bench, the one I'd sat on years ago, after a particularly brutal therapy session. I'd cried there once, thinking nobody saw me. Today, a young woman sat in the same spot, head down, shoulders trembling. She was holding her phone, but not looking at it, just squeezing it like it might hold her together. I slowed down, pulled a tissue from my coat pocket and offered it. She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "It's okay," I said gently. "You're not alone." She sniffled. "I'm just tired of being the one who's left behind." I sat beside her. "Then stop waiting for them to choose you," I said. "Choose yourself." She blinked at me like she hadn't considered that. We didn't speak after that. Just sat there. Two women. Different ages. Same kind of ache. I guess that's the thing about losing everything. Sometimes you find yourself in the ruins, and sometimes you find the pieces that were never ruined in the first place, just buried under someone else's version of your story. I lost a marriage. I lost illusions. But I found my voice, and now every woman they tried to silence knows we're louder than they ever imagined. Sometimes the best revenge is telling the truth with your head held high and never looking back.